That's probably the worst thing we have in this whole museum. That Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nurse in 1970 by her mother as a Christmas present. But as most girls do, even 28 years old, she would take the doll to bed with her, wrap her arm around, and go to sleep. I'd do the same thing with a pillow. But then she started taking it to the breakfast nook, where the arms one morning went onto the table. Now, she lived with another nurse, and they shared the expenses of the apartment, which was 4 blocks away from Hartford Hospital.
Right.
At that point, they told the girls about the incident, and one said, "I know a medium." So they held a seance that night. That was the beginning of many seances with this doll. They would come home at night, and the woman had told them, the medium, that there was a spirit of a 6-year-old child in the doll by the name of Annabelle, who had been killed outside of their apartment house in an automobile accident. Well, there was such a child, but God does not allow a child spirit to go into a doll. This was a devil, a demon, inside the doll, which was impersonating the spirit of a child.
Some dolls are made for joy. A stitched smile, a soft hug, a child's companion that waits patiently on the bed or sits quietly on a shelf, watching the world change from the same little corner. But every so often, a doll becomes something else entirely. Not because of what it's made of, but because of what decides to move in. This isn't about Hollywood horror or haunted house cliches. This is a true account. A case that chilled even the most experienced demonologist. A story of deception, possession, and the quiet terror of something unnatural, wearing a smile sewn in red thread. Tonight, on Creep Canvas, we open the case file of Annabelle, the doll that didn't blink, didn't breathe, but was very much alive. The year was 1970, Hartford, Connecticut. Donna, a 28-year-old nursing student, was living with her best friend, Angie. They shared a modest apartment, neat, practical, filled with medical textbooks, paper coffee cups, and the occasional sound of Sinatra humming from the old kitchen radio. They were grounded women, educated, trained to trust facts, not feelings. Neither of them believed in the supernatural. Not yet. On Donna's birthday, her mother mailed her a gift wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a doll, a vintage Raggedy Ann, large and soft, with bright red yarn hair, and that familiar painted smile. It was a sweet, sentimental gesture. Donna had adored dolls like that as a child. She smiled and thanked her mother and placed the doll on her bed. Nothing special, just a bit of nostalgia perched on a pillow. At least, that's how it started. In the days that followed, something subtle began to shift. Donna would leave the doll in one position, only to return home and find it changed. At first, the difference was small. A leg bent where it hadn't been, an arm slightly raised. She brushed it off, chalking it up to memory or movement. But as time passed, the changes grew more obvious. The doll began to appear in different rooms altogether. She'd leave it on the bed and find it later seated upright on the living room couch. She and Angie even joked about it at first. Maybe they were just forgetful. Maybe one of them moved it without realizing. But neither of them laughed when they began to find it kneeling. Donna distinctly remembered never placing the doll in such a position. Yet there it was, facing the wall, hunched as if in prayer or punishment. One afternoon, Donna returned home from class and found something on the floor near her bedroom door. It was a note, small and yellowed, and torn from a sheet of parchment paper neither of the women kept in the apartment. On it, scrawled in what looked like the shaky hand of a child, were the words, "Help us." She stood there for a long time, staring at the note in her hand, her breath catching in her throat. Angie hadn't left it. There were no children in the building, and the handwriting was unfamiliar, unsettling in its simplicity. A second note appeared the next day. "Help Lou." Lou was Angie's fiancé, a man who had never liked the doll. From the beginning, he'd insisted something was off about it. He wasn't one for superstition, but every time he looked at it, he felt as though he were being studied, as if something behind those button eyes was memorizing the details of his face. It wasn't long before Lou stopped sleeping at their apartment altogether. He said the energy inside made his skin crawl. But one night, he stayed over. That's when it got worse. He woke in the middle of the night with the unmistakable sensation that something was wrong. His chest felt heavy, like a weight had settled on it. He tried to sit up, but he couldn't. His limbs were frozen as though held by something unseen. He opened his eyes and looked down toward the foot of the bed. And that's when he saw her. Annabelle. She was standing somehow upright at the edge of the mattress. Her head was tilted slightly to one side. Her arms hung loose at her sides. She didn't move, but Lou could feel her intention. Then slowly, she began to climb. He felt her hands, not plastic or wood, but soft fabric, brush against his skin as she made her way up his body, step by careful step. The weight increased. His breathing became shallow. His mind screamed, but his voice was trapped. When her face was inches from his, he passed out. No explanation, no injuries. But Lou woke up drenched in sweat, his heart thudding in his chest like a warning bell. He swore to Angie that it had been real, that it wasn't a dream. And by the end of the week, there was proof. Donna and Angie had stepped out for a few hours, leaving Lou alone in the apartment. He kept himself busy reading on the couch, trying to convince himself the experience had been stress, sleep deprivation, something he could name. But a sound pulled him from his thoughts. A quiet rustling, barely more than a whisper, coming from Donna's bedroom. He stood, slowly making his way down the hallway. The door creaked slightly as he opened it, and he found the room empty, or nearly empty. The doll lay face down on the carpet. Something in his instincts screamed, but he didn't leave. He walked forward, toward the doll, reaching out to pick it up. In that moment, a force he couldn't see or explain hit him hard in the chest. He staggered back, pain blooming like fire across his skin. It felt like claws, not blunt force, not a punch, scratches. He ripped open his shirt and stared in the mirror. 3 long, deep gouges slashed diagonally across his chest, red, angry, and bleeding. They faded within 2 days, but the fear didn't. They didn't want to believe it. Donna, Angie, and Lou sat together in that apartment. Lights dimmed, the doll locked in Donna's room like some misbehaving pet. They considered calling a priest, but who do you even call when you think your furniture might be haunted? Eventually, Donna confided in a contact from work, a friend of a friend, someone who knew a medium. That's how it began. The chain of introductions that would end in one of the most documented and disturbing cases in paranormal history. The medium arrived quietly. She was older, composed, with steady hands and a voice like fading linen. She asked questions and took notes, then sat across from the doll on the couch, surrounded by the flickering glow of 3 white candles. The room was silent, but somehow the shadows seemed to listen. When she spoke, it was with certainty. She said the doll was inhabited by a spirit, a little girl named Annabelle Higgins. She had died tragically nearby, the medium explained. No family, no one to remember her. The girl's spirit had found the doll, and through it, found Donna, someone kind enough to love her. Donna's eyes welled with tears, the thought of a lonely child clinging to this cotton body for comfort. It was heartbreaking. And that's when she said it. The thing that changed everything. She gave the spirit permission to stay. It didn't feel like a ritual. It wasn't formal. Just a soft sentence spoken aloud by a good person who didn't know she was speaking to a monster. Because the Warrens would later say this wasn't a little girl. It wasn't human at all. Ed and Lorraine Warren had seen a lot. Cold spots that whispered, staircases that growled, rooms that pushed back when you stepped inside. But even they admitted, few things unsettled them like Annabelle. They arrived days after the seance. Ed, quiet, methodical, always carrying the weight of everything he'd seen. Lorraine, elegant but alert, her intuition more of a radar than a gift. When she stepped into the apartment, she didn't speak right away. She simply stood still, eyes fixed on the hallway. Later, she would say that the presence in that apartment was coiled, watching, not hiding, but waiting to be seen. She turned to Donna and told her something she'd never forget. This isn't a ghost. Spirits do not possess objects. They possess people. What you let into your home isn't a child. It's something inhuman, pretending to be weak so you'd let it in. The notes, the scratches, the movement, all of it, Lorraine explained, were steps in a process known as oppression. A methodical wearing down of the will, the body, and the spirit. If they hadn't acted when they did, the next phase would have been possession. Father Cook, a Catholic priest familiar with the Warrens, agreed to perform the house blessing. It wasn't a full exorcism, the kind you see in movies, but it was serious, scriptural and measured. He moved through the apartment with prayer and holy water, each word spoken with deliberate weight, as if the syllables themselves carried fire. He cleansed the rooms one by one, the doll watching quietly from the hallway floor. Donna stayed in the kitchen. Angie clutched a rosary. Lou refused to speak. When it was done, they were told the entity would no longer be able to hold influence there. but it wasn't destroyed. Whatever had infected the doll wasn't gone. It was simply displaced. So the Warrens took it with them. Ed placed Annabelle in the back seat of their car. He didn't throw her in the trunk. He didn't let her touch the seat unblessed. The doll was wrapped in holy relics and secured like a biological threat. Lorraine sat up front reading from her Bible. The trip back to Monroe, Connecticut should have been uneventful. Instead, it was a gauntlet. The brakes failed twice, once on a downhill curve. The engine cut out inexplicably at a traffic light. The power steering froze mid-turn. The car felt like it was being pulled by invisible hands, yanked into danger again and again. Lorraine's voice grew louder. She read the prayers faster. Ed reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a vial of holy water, and sprinkled it across the cloth-wrapped doll. Only then did the car obey the road again. The rest of the ride was silent. They didn't speak, didn't even breathe too loudly. Because somehow, even with the engine humming and the road unfolding ahead, it felt like they weren't alone in the car. The doll arrived at the Warren home just before dusk. The sun dipped behind the trees like it didn't want to witness what came next. Ed carried Annabelle through the front door with both hands, careful not to let her touch anything bare. Lorraine opened the door to their private office, already lined with other artifacts, cursed objects, and stained remnants of the dark. But even among mirrors that shattered on their own and music boxes that played without touch, Annabelle felt different. They placed her on Ed's desk at first, unsure how to contain her. But within days, she moved. Once she was found slumped beside the office bookshelf. No one had entered the room. Another time, Lorraine heard rustling just before dawn and found Annabelle standing upright in a corner, her fabric dress swaying slightly, even though the air was dead still. And then came the levitation. It happened twice, once during the day and once at night. The doll lifted off the desk without warning, floated for several seconds, and dropped to the floor with a soft, sickening flop. There was no breeze, no tremor, just a presence. A pressure that made the walls of the room feel narrower than they should be. Lorraine stopped entering the room alone after that. Ed knew they needed something stronger than shelves and prayer. He commissioned a glass and wood display case, handmade, reinforced, and etched with protective blessings in Latin. Inside they placed the doll. On the outside, nailed to the front, they affixed a sign in bold, commanding print. Warning, positively do not open. It wasn't a joke. The museum was open to the public for years. Visitors came in waves, curious about the paranormal, thrilled to stand close to evil without feeling its bite. But not everyone respected the boundaries. And Annabelle does not forgive disrespect. One of the earliest and most infamous stories tied to the doll took place on a humid summer afternoon. A young couple walked into the museum. He was brash, bold, the kind of man who always made fun of things that scared him. His girlfriend was quiet, hesitant, keeping her distance from the glass. He tapped on the case, once, twice, hard enough to rattle it. He laughed. He turned to his girlfriend and said something like, "If this doll's really haunted, I dare it to come home with me." Ed heard the commotion and warned him sternly, told him to leave. The man brushed it off, shrugged, and walked out. Less than an hour later, while driving home on his motorcycle, he lost control. The bike swerved violently into a tree, and the man died instantly. His girlfriend survived, broken and terrified, and later confirmed what he'd done. It was no coincidence. Annabelle remembered. Not long after, a priest visited the museum, escorted by the Warrens. He was skeptical, as many were. He stood before Annabelle's case with folded arms, looked her straight in the face and muttered, "You're just a rag doll. You can't hurt anyone." Ed was immediately uneasy. He warned the priest to show respect, but the man laughed and moved on. 3 hours later, while driving home, that priest crashed his car. He survived, barely. When Ed and Lorraine visited him in the hospital, the man whispered something he hadn't told anyone else. Just before the crash, he said he had seen Annabelle's face in his rearview mirror. To this day, the doll remains sealed inside that glass case. When the museum was active, Lorraine refused to speak to it. Even Ed, known for his calm, avoided eye contact. Over the years, dozens of visitors claimed to feel dizzy, nauseous, or anxious when near Annabelle. Some fainted, some vomited. One woman reportedly collapsed minutes after mocking her and refused to return, even for a refund. Tony Spera, the Warren son-in-law and current caretaker of the collection, continues to guard the doll in private. He says they take no chances. Holy water, protective rituals, boundaries. But even with every measure in place, people still report strange things happening after visiting her. Accidents and illness, electronic malfunctions, and nightmares they can't shake. Annabelle doesn't lash out often, but when she does, it's personal. Some spirits cling, others follow, but the worst among them, those that feed on fear and worship the act of manipulation, don't whisper, they wait. Annabelle isn't frightening because she looks scary. She's frightening because she doesn't have to. She waits behind glass. She doesn't speak. She doesn't move unless she's certain you aren't watching. Unless you mock her, or invite her, or dare her. They say evil wears many masks. Sometimes it wears porcelain, sometimes it wears shadows, and sometimes it wears a smile that someone stitched by hand. This has been another story from Creep Canvas, where horror sits quietly and sometimes waits in cotton skin. If you ever find yourself near a doll that never seems to stay where you left it, don't ask it for its name. Don't speak to it. And above all, don't open the case.